Mesdames et messieurs, on va commencer notre rencontre.
We'll begin our meeting now. I understand that one of our members can't be with us right away, but will be joining us in a few minutes.
To this meeting of the Board of Internal Economy. I would like to call this meeting to order. I understand, of course, our Deputy Speaker, Chris D'Entremont, is joining us online, so he'll be available on the screens at the front of the room. And so, welcome to all for being here today. Est-ce que la traduction fonctionne, Madame?
Is the interpretation working now?
On va faire cette rencontre.
We certainly want to do our meeting in both languages. This is my first meeting, so I would ask your forgiveness for any mistakes I might make, but I think that we have good will around the table, and I hope we will be able to do our work effectively and efficiently.
An opportunity to take a look at it and to input on it. And before I begin, I'd like to, I know that although she is not in the room, I would like to eventually welcome Ms. Gould and Mr. Gerritsen, our two new members to the Board of Internal Economy. And with that, Mr. McKinnon, I understand that, Mr. McKinnon, you've been designated the spokesperson for the government to replace Mr. Holland. Can you confirm that?
I'm pleased to confirm that.
First, easy decision there. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining. Minutes from the previous meeting, has everyone taken a look at that? I'm assuming that, is there any corrections or modifications that people would like to make? If not, Monsieur Julien, would you like to...
Question sur les affaires éminentes.
I have a question about I think that we can adopt it, and then I would ask my questions. So we are adopting the motion, and the second is to have any matters arising. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Welcome to the Board of Internal Economy. I think that Mr. Scheer and I are the deans of this committee now. And Mr. Scheer has certainly been on board for quite a bit of his career. We welcome you here, Mr. Speaker, as well as Ms. Gould and Mr. Gerritsen. We will work, as always, cooperatively and with good team spirit. Now, coming back to the minutes and the question of interpretation resources, we asked follow-up questions, and this is something that began with the virtual parliament. I would like to know when the information requested will be provided, if it has been provided, when we will be able to discuss it, and in upcoming meetings. Thank you for that question, Mr. Julien, and for raising it in the past as well. We will have more information about that matter, and if we have consensus here in the committee, we will put it on the agenda for our next meeting, and then we will have all of the information that the members need, and then the committee can make a decision based on that information. Are you in agreement? Yes. Thank you. Ms. de Bellefeuille, I also want to congratulate you on your election, and you can certainly count on my participation. You will know that I am a member, if you have been prepared properly for your meetings, that I always have constructive suggestions. And again, welcome. We are a good group. We will work together to ensure that we can provide proper administration and support for members and their work. I agree with Mr. Julien. Very concerned about interpretation matters, and I have a few questions to ask you arising from the meetings of June 15th concerning interpretation resources. The administration team, we were told, was preparing a pilot project which could be a solution to increasing interpretation resources. The pilot project has been refined, and so I would like to know whether that pilot project will soon be in place to be able to provide assistance to our committees. We will invite Ian MacDonald to give us an update on this. Thank you. Mr. MacDonald, please. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to answer Ms. de Bellefeuille's question, we are continuing with our testing and simulations for the the remote interpretation system. We are doing parallel meetings right now. So the committee meeting is held. We record the interpretation of the remotely located interpreters to see if any adjustments are needed. And we're working with our Translation Bureau colleagues to make sure that everything runs smoothly and that they are satisfied with the quality. So this is underway and has been for the last few weeks. We think that we will begin with 1 or 2 committees and then add this to the capacity for interpretation over the next period. I would like Mr. MacDonald to confirm something. It seems to me that there are still time slots to add committee meetings. As the whip, I would point out Monday from 11 to 1, Monday evening from 6:30 to 8:30. Then we have the joint meeting. We also have Friday 10 to 1 p.m. Could you tell me whether these time slots are still available for parliamentary work? Thank you. Through you, Mr. Speaker. I would have to look and confirm that. But according to the information, we can consult the whips and we can then consult our colleagues to see what can be done. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking that specific question because in some committees, they would like to have additional meetings and they would like to know if there are time slots available. And I would also point out that to the boy that there is a committee, International Trade, that has decided not to hold a meeting because there is no time slot available yesterday, today, or tomorrow. I don't know whether this was a unanimous decision. I would like to know whether the clerk of the International Trade Committee had properly informed the members of that committee. I will certainly look into that situation and provide that information. When BOI holds its meeting, I or my colleague usually would contact the clerks. So I don't know whether the International Trade Committee followed that process or not. I can certainly find out and see whether I can get that information. I have one last question, Mr. Speaker. I imagine that maybe at our November meeting, we can look at BOI at improvements in the House. According to what I have seen and others have told me, there is a significant improvement. There are more members present in the House and at their committees. There are fewer absences. This is just based on our observation, but I know that this effort has come from the shared pressure put on by members and by the administration. Thank you. Ms. de Bellefeuille, that's music to my ears. And we are certainly making every effort on our side and in the administration to improve things. We should also thank your work and that of every party to improve the situation in that regard. We should ensure that the members have every resource that they need to carry out their work well. Are there any other questions on that?
Seeing none, is there any other business arising from the minutes from the previous meeting? If not, let's continue to item 3 on the agenda. And this is to be presented by Mr. D'Entremont. I'd like you to lead us through this chapter. Go ahead, Chris. Thank you very much. I have 3 presentations actually to make today, and I hope that this one is on the LTVP. Okay.
TVP working group. I'm here today to update the board on the progress of the Center Block Rehabilitation Program and the working group consultations, and to bring forward recommendations to the board for considerations and approval. The following items were reviewed and discussed by the working group over 3 meetings, and an additional one that was held jointly with the Senate LTVP subcommittee on common elements. And being that I am off-site, I do hope that there's a number of staff that are sitting at the table as well, so they can answer some questions as we move along. In terms of an update, the project site work continues well. Public Service and Procurement Canada, or PSPC, has confirmed the overall project health is in line with the planned approved scope, cost, and schedule. The value spent to date on the Center Block rehabilitation, including the Parliament Welcome Center, is $680 million of the estimated $4.5 to $5 billion as of September 15, 2023. The targeted timeframe for completion construction still remains between 2030 and 2031. Many members of the House of Commons have had the opportunity to see for themselves by participating in the tours of the construction site, where they viewed the degree of demolition, protection, and progress within the historic Center Block, as well as the excavation for the new Parliament Welcome Center. The feedback from members has been very positive, and there has certainly been appreciation and excitement for the project and the ability for members to engage or to be engaged. À l'heure actuelle, la démolition est...
Currently, the Center Block demolition and abatement is tracking at 95% complete. The Center Block work should be targeting completion in January 2024. The exterior masonry conservation is completed on the north facade, and workers have now moved to the east facade. Overall completion of the masonry work for the existing Center Block building is approximately 12% complete. Excavation for the Parliament Welcome Center has been substantially complete and has reached the desired depth. So if you've looked at the hole, it goes down to the bottom. Boreholes are now being drilled for the geothermal system, with approximately 50 out of 92 holes complete. In parallel, the design is advancing in the design development phase, targeting submission 2 package for review later this fall. In that regard, and from the latest detailed reviews the working group has been involved in, the following recommendations for BOI decisions today will facilitate that work.
Indigenous peoples, members and visitors to Center Block, it was important to the working group that we take into consideration the very important ceremonies and traditions related to indigeneity, which would be occurring in the renovated Center Block. The current practice allows for smudging and quillic to be carried out anywhere in the Parliament buildings with proper notice so that systems and personnel can be made ready to accommodate activities. In the newly renovated Center Block and the new Parliament Welcome Center, the recommendation is to continue this practice. The two-phase fire alarm system being planned for the building will also facilitate this process. In addition, a proposal for a dedicated space that is purpose-built for smudging and quillic ceremonies was put forward and advocated before by the Senate. Upon review of several options and a joint discussion with the Senate, the working group agrees that the dedicated space would be a valuable addition to Center Block. It would be an intimate room designed with Indigenous design principles appropriate for the function and significance. We therefore recommend to the BOY that the dedicated space be approved as an addition to the program and be implemented in the newly created space in the center courtyard, of which you will see in the next item. We also ask for endorsement of the overall approach. Comme le bureau le sait grâce au...
As the board is aware from previous updates, the center court above the Hall of Honor is to be infilled on 3 levels. While creating approximately 750 square meters in new floor area, the enclosed light court will also assist in achieving project goals on sustainability and accessibility. The approach for the 6th floor has already been endorsed as a shared parliamentarian space. Further work was required to make a recommendation for the remainder of the space. Options for the function and allocation of the new space on the 4th and 5th floors of the infill have been reviewed by the working group and have also been discussed jointly with the Senate Long-Term Vision Plan Subcommittee. Numerous options were considered with the common goal of finding the best and the most flexible use to be able to support parliamentarians in their future workplace. We have come to agreement with a joint recommendation for the board's consideration. The option that we are proposing for endorsement is to fully share both levels and to make the new flexible workspace available to all parliamentarians. As well, we are proposing the location on the 4th floor infill as an opportunity to include the dedicated space for smudging and quillic activities. Since it's a new infill space, like a blank slate, it would allow for the space to be designed in a respectful way for the Indigenous ceremonial function and gatherings. Both the Senate Subcommittee and our working group are excited to recommend including this new space in the center block for parliamentarians' use.
The gallery seating proposal was approved by the board in March of 2020. With the approval, it was acknowledged that there has been a significant reduction of the overall number of the gallery seats to accommodate accessibility improvements, and the BOIE asked that the project team pursue alternate viewing options for visitors. Since then, we're happy to report that a very good proposal has been presented. The proposal is a phased approach and introduces some bench seating in the gallery, which allows for the seating capacity to increase significantly. When the center block reopens, it would have most of the north-south galleries with benching. This would increase the gallery seating capacity from the original renovated option of 296 individual seats to between 424 and 431 range with benches. If further capacity is found to be necessary, the east and west gallery seating could be converted to benches at that time and would allow up to 455 seats total, of which we would accommodate up to 24 accessible spaces. For further, pre-closure of the center block gallery seated 553, and west block currently sits about 334. We will find this to be an excellent improvement in capacity and accessibility, and we recommend the proposed approach for approval by the board. Au moment de l'élaboration des plans d'aménagement,
In the development of the layouts for the center block plan, the working group has reviewed detailed proposals for the number, location, and sizes of the leadership suites and standard parliamentarian office units. The offices are distributed over the 6 floors of center block, and to the extent possible, leadership suites dedicated in similar areas as in center block pre-closure where possible. New locations have been proposed based on thorough consultations with the whip's offices of each official party, and this took place in late 2022. This was to ensure the most functional options for their party's style of working and with the working group for the overall approach. The current proposal has done a good job at reconciling everyone's preferences to date. The remainder of offices are proposed to be attributed, and you can see here in slides 8 to 13. And we propose, as I was saying, that the remainder of offices be attributed as general parliamentary office units or ministerial suites and allowed as required in a similar manner to pre-closure closer to the center block's reopening. In this proposal, the average size of a parliamentary office unit is 86 square meters, so slightly smaller than the current BOE-approved 90 square meter standard. The majority is within a 15% variance. The variance results from the historic condition of the building and trying to maximize the number of offices that can return to center block. The total amount of parliamentary office units returning to center block will be 50, including the leadership and speakers allocation. This is approximately 20 fewer POUs than prior to center block being closed, due mostly to base building upgrades and code compliance, as well as larger 2-story lobbies and standardization of the parliamentary office units themselves. The parliamentary office units will have 2 entry points, one leading to reception and one directly to the MP office. Further work is underway to more closely look at details of the individual office units with respect to acoustics, furniture, accessibility, and any requirements that may be required to support parliamentarians in their future workplace. We'll return to you with more information once consultations are complete and when work is ready to be presented. At this point, unless the BOE feels further consultation or discussion is required today or through the party leaders' offices, we are recommending endorsement of the number, location, and sizes of the leadership suites and standard parliamentarian office units as presented today so that the design can progress. There always remains certain flexibility through the allocation of the distribution at any point in time, given it will still be some years before center block is ready for occupancy.
and I think finally, the working group was briefed on the existing processes and practices with respect to arts and artifacts. The authority of these lies with the speaker and for common areas of center block with both speakers. The speaker can also choose to delegate the working group some items for consideration. Hence, we would make recommendations to the BOE in these instances. The following 3 process maps were presented for everyone's understanding. There will be many decisions on this project with respect to arts and artifacts, given the heritage nature of this project and the opportunities that will present themselves in the new Parliament Welcome Centre. The working group was briefed on some of those elements and the complexities involved in decisions that will be required. The project team will be putting a list of priority elements together and keeping us abreast of the work in this respect. Should the speaker feel further consultation is required, we will be available to assist that capacity and report further to the board. En conclusion, le groupe de travail a participé.
In conclusion, the working group has been very engaged in a detailed review of the issues and proposed design for Centre Block and the new Parliament Welcome Centre. We continue to be confident that parliamentarians' requirements are being taken into consideration. We are very pleased with the progress and with the opportunity to be involved in this project. The working group anticipates a site visit this fall and will continue to review and consult on the ongoing work. We would expect to be able to provide a design update to the board sometime this winter. Thank you, and I think it's been a while since the spring meeting, and so thank you, and I'm happy to take questions or elaborate on any of the information provided. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur d'Entremont.
Thank you very much, Mr. D'Entremont, for that very complete and useful presentation. There are members that would like to ask questions. We'll start with Mr. McKinnon. Thank you, and congratulations on chairing your first meeting here. So, Mr. D'Entremont is doing a wonderful job in chairing the long-term vision and plan working group, and I would also like to thank his colleagues who are here with him, or rather they are here, and he is not in the room. I've been asked to pose a question to Mr. Wright. I want to make one or two observations first. There are going to be decisions to be made still, as Mr. D'Entremont has pointed out, regarding parliamentary office units and spaces. I think he is quite right. We have planned the space for the West Block. I think I can speak on behalf of all of us in saying that we feel that we lack the space that we need in this building, and I hope that we don't make the same mistake in the new center block. There are many offices for the administration that need to be in the center block, and I hope that those offices and the employees will be as comfortable as they need to be, but that we can have the maximum number of parliamentarians possible able to have their offices in the new center block. So, following those comments, we welcome the information. We would like to know why there are fewer offices, but we in fact understand why that is the case. Perhaps you could go over that again here this morning. We certainly want to have the maximum number of members that can be in the center block as possible. So that's one point, and perhaps you could consider that a question, and I could ask Mr. Wright that question. The Auditor General has been laudatory in her comments about the project, and I congratulate you on that. I know it is hard to get a pass mark from the AG, so congratulations to the whole team. So I would like to hear from Mr. Wright generally about the work, how it's progressing, the cost, and the timetable. Thank you. Chris, would you like to answer that question? No, thank you. I think that Mr. Wright is in a much better position to do so. Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. To begin with, we are continuing to do our work in alignment with the timetable, the schedule, and the costs.
To add what Deputy Speaker D'Entremont provided, the excavation for the main Parliament Welcome Centre is completed. And we've now installed well more than half of the geothermal wells at the ground level of the Parliament Welcome Centre, and that's progressing well. The interior excavation and removal of hazardous materials, so well over 95% complete at this point. At this point, more than 25 million pounds of asbestos-containing material has been removed from the building. Monsieur D'Entremont indiquait le progrès sur le
Mr. D'Entremont talked about the masonry and the progress that we have made there. We finished with the north facade. We did well on that, and now we've begun on the east facade, which is also progressing well. And we are on schedule.
Challenging part of the project. We're into that now, and this is really the critical path of the project. And this is the excavation underneath the centre block, so that the Parliament Welcome Centre and the centre block can become one facility. To be able to accomplish that is very challenging, because the centre block really can only move about 5 millimeters during the construction, and we have to excavate under that. So that includes putting the centre block on essentially a base of piles or stilts, so about 800 of those. And that will allow us to do the base isolation seismic retrofit for the building as well. To be able to take away the rock beneath the building, we have to have these piles in place and replace the floor slab at the bottom of the centre block. Very technically challenging, but it's progressing well. So of the 800 piles, we now have over 250 of those installed. And the replacement of the level 1 slab is progressing well, and that will allow us to move on to that next stage. Maybe a couple of other things just to indicate. The heritage restoration work has already begun. So there's as you well know, there's about 22,000 heritage assets within the building, which range from single items like the linen ceiling of the House of Commons chamber, to the 53 bells in the Peace Tower, to 35,000 marble tiles in the building. So it's a broad range of heritage assets, each with a conservation strategy. So the restoration, the conservation of the stained glass is progressing very well. 22 of the 53 bells are in Holland, being currently restored. The heritage lighting, the restoration of that is proceeding very well, as well as woodwork. So we have really what you could call a 3-phase project. Phase 1 is essentially complete. Phase 2 is well underway. And, phase 3 is in the future. That's putting in all the new systems, elevators, mechanical, electrical, and the final fit-up. So the project is proceeding well. And as we are here today, decision-making is the key to help ensure that it continues to proceed well. What I could say, and those are really decisions that the House of Commons takes at the end of the day. But I can, kind of add the color commentary that lessons learned for the West Block are really being integrated. And while it's very true that every one of these projects is a challenge for space and how to allocate that space, but I would say that core parliamentary operations are being prioritized in the allocation of space, whether that's to providing additional space for the lobbies so that the chamber can function more effectively as more members come online, as well as very much prioritizing offices for members of parliament in comparison to the administration.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Scheer.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to ask a few questions just for clarification, because this is the first time I've really had the opportunity to see this since I was speaker on the front end of this. But just so I'm crystal clear, the infill in the center block, we're talking about this, like the ceiling of the Hall of Honor is not being lowered. You're building on top of what's existing there, so we're not going to lose that wonderful vaulted experience.
Thank you very much for the question, and it's an important one. And there's, as you know well, there's 50 high heritage spaces in the building, and those are, being, I would say, being cared for with, great attention to ensure that the look and feel of these spaces are as they were when members of Parliament left the building at the end of 2018. I will say, though, in some cases, there's been alterations to the building, and we're going back to what was the original heritage elements. So, Speaker's office is a perfect. There was paint that was put over some, very beautiful original detailing, and we're going back to that. So, we're the respect of the heritage is a core value of this project, and we're even trying to go back. So, in this particular instance, there will be zero impact to the Hall of Honor, one of the most important spaces in the building, by putting this addition on top of it. The only change that you would see if you're walking on the fourth or upper floors, you would see quite not a very sightly roof line to the Hall of Honor with some moss growing on that. That will now kind of be infilled, but from the interior of the building, zero impact.
And the spaces, on some of the diagrams, you do see that there are kind of courtyards internally. I think it's on the kind of in between the Hall of Honor and what would be the exterior wall of the members' lobby on the opposition side. Is that going to remain an open space, or was that ever contemplated to fill that part in too, to create additional center block office space?
Right. Thank you very much for the question. So, as you point out, there's 3 courtyards in the building. They were previously unused and couldn't even really access them. Both the west and east courtyards will essentially become the roadway for the public to enter into the building. That allows us to avoid taking away parliamentary space for all of the elevators, stairwells, code elements that need to come into the building. We're able to put it in those courtyards that weren't accessed before, and all of the public, which the public-facing component of this building, very important. They're able to move in and out of the building without any friction between parliamentary operations. The center courtyard, which we were just talking about with the infill over the Hall of Honor, so the east and west, we of course are putting the glass roofs over those so that they become interior spaces. The courtyard infill, we are not putting a glass roof over the central courtyard. It was envisioned. We did discuss it. We moved away from that because we had to put a lot more mechanical equipment in the roof line of the center block to modernize it. And by not putting a glass roof over the central courtyard, it allowed us to have some different approaches with fresh air intake, which allowed us to lower the roof a little, which is very important to getting approvals with the National Capital Commission and making sure that the project could stay on pace. And it was not really a significant loss. There were not really going to be additional offices in that space, so it wasn't a really additional loss to parliamentary operations.
On the Indigenous space, do you have any reference points of how often these types of ceremonies were held in Center Block prior to the renovation project? How many times would we be looking at hosting an event like that?
Yeah, we don't have actual figures, but it happens on a frequent basis. It happens everywhere, whether it be a member's office or in a committee room. So the flexibility is really kind of what we're aiming to keep to be able to do it everywhere, and then specifically create a purpose-built space for ceremonial type activities.
And the specificity, I guess, of that is because of, you know, if there's smoke from the ceremony, you've got considerations from, so
Yeah. So, yeah, because of the fire alarm systems, right? So that's why we have, I mean, the building was going to have a two-phased fire alarm system anyways, but it still requires notification through our security services so that they prepare, you know, should the alarm come on and stuff like that. So that ceremonial room will help us be able to do it like a little bit quicker at times and a little less, I guess, planned, right?
And is the thinking there that it would be kind of exclusively for that particular purpose, or from your perspective, is it just that it will be built to accommodate it, and then it would be up to the two speakers of the internal use policy to decide what types of events can be held? Because I was just thinking of other types of ceremonies that might have.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. And just, I just want to, I do understand that the board was supposed to have had a meeting and then a subsequent tour, and then the House adjourned last June. But there was a tour that was provided to the media, and there was a Canadian Press report at the time where you did outline many of these changes. So I'm just wondering, like, how far down the pipe are we? Like, is some of this kind of a fait accompli, and you've already made planning to order materials and schedule in, or is this truly like nothing's going to happen unless the board takes a decision today?
So if I may, it is a board decision. We're in design on these interior decisions, right? Where, as Rob says, the base building is, you know, is moving along. Where they're replacing the floor, and we're soon going to have to lock in all the decisions that affect what's called core and shell, like those base building elements, like elevators, washrooms, things like that. But we're still in the design. We're in design development, and we're expecting. Probably that's still going on for another year, so we don't want to make huge changes, but we certainly are here to, you know, solicit the input and make sure that parliamentarians are satisfied with what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any other questions? Ms. Gould, but also let me take an opportunity to welcome you to as a new member of Boyd.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to be on Boy. And thank you very much for the presentation. Apologies, I came in a bit late, but I think my question follows a bit on Mr. Scheer's, just in terms of the designs. For some of us, it's the first time that we're seeing them, so thank you for including them. Obviously, this is something that's really important that is going to impact generations of parliamentarians to come. I'm just wondering, in terms of, I understand there's going to be a future meeting of the LTVP group. You know, if there's an opportunity for all of us perhaps to take these designs away, and for the LTVP, did I say that right? Sorry. Group to look at this at their next meeting, to perhaps come to the final approval there. But I think probably some of us would like to spend a bit more time with the designs, because, you know, I think overall there's a really nice vision there, but we just want a little bit more time to kind of be able to say, you know, this works, this doesn't work, and allow that group to look at it. So maybe there's a space where we kind of say, you know, in support of general direction, but give us a bit of time to look at this, and then that group can come back with final feedback from all of us.
Well, I think I'll answer that one quickly, and then I don't know if staff will have an answer to it as well. I mean, the staff, of course, have been working really hard to put some of these things together, and I think we as LTVP are trying to represent things as best we can for the caucuses that we represent. So I would say it would probably be a great opportunity maybe to pull, you know, the whips and House leaders together, and maybe some members of the LTVP maybe go off and do a bit of a tour of Center Block, and, you know, take an opportunity not only to see the designs, because seeing design on a hunk of paper is different than actually standing in the space itself and saying, okay, well, here's what we actually have to work with. So I can put that out that we can try to have a broader meeting at some point, and if we have to do it in chunks, each caucus individually or all caucuses together, maybe we can do that as well. And I don't mean caucuses, I just mean House leaders and whips offices that'll be in the House. So I can offer that out for sure.
That's very helpful, and I think there's a lot of interest around the table for that. Peter, Mr. Julien.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
My welcoming comments to Ms. Gould before she came in, and so glad that you are with us. We've had a refreshing of the boy, and this is important. I wanted to compliment staff on the incredible work that's involved. I particularly am impressed by the degree to which the heritage character of Centre Block is being preserved, and I know that has basically forced the removal of all of the heritage tiles, all of the components of the building, and then the rehabilitation and then reconstruction. It's an enormous task, but I am quite confident that at the end it'll be a building that Canadians can be proud of as the center of our democracy. What I'm interested in asking you, Mr. Speaker, and the chair of the LTVP, Mr. d'Entremont, is what are the decision points today? Because it appears from the presentation that there will be a design update that we will be looking at. I certainly agree that we should be going through the building and consulting with the whips and House leaders and caucuses. But what are the decision points today, if any, and when do we see a design update that would be brought to the BOI for discussion and, I'm assuming, approval?
Well,
Rob, if you want to grab that one.
Thank you very much for the question. So a design update, I mean, working with the House of Commons, we could bring a design update at any time that you would like to receive an update. And we could do that in tandem with a site visit or a formal discussion here in the committee room. On decision making in particular, I mean, I think it would, I can't emphasize enough the importance of the decision making. And yes, we are in design, but we are also in construction. And the decisions inform the design, which informs the tender packages that go out to construction firms. And although the project continues to track well, we have been taking on some water on the design side and the decision making. So we have a tremendous relationship with the parliamentary partners, with the House and the Senate. And of course, in the Centre Block, decisions have to be made in tandem, not just in this House, but with the Senate of Canada as well. And so we've projected 21 key decisions for this parliamentary session to be able to kind of keep on track. So I just want to make sure that nobody would leave here with a different understanding that decision making can be deferred without any impacts.
If I may, Chris and Rob, if I understand it correctly, Chris, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are 4 decision points which we're looking at, and I think one seeking consensus for, and I think there's probably one which is a subject of discussion around the table right now. So on the 4, if you look at your packages, the first one would be on
page 12. If we can get page 12 of the slides up.
Right. So the smudging and Kuluk practices, we're seeking consensus on. We're seeking a consensus on a central court infill. We're also seeking consensus on accessibility. And then the one which I think is a subject of more discussion around this table is the leadership suites and the POUs. So I think those are the issues which we're having. But I know that Mr. Scheer and Madame de Bellefeuille ont des questions à poser aussi.
I know that Mr. Scheer and Madame de Belfoy have questions to ask as well.
To pick up on what my counterpart, the government house leader, said on having a bit of time to digest this, and maybe another opportunity to actually have a site visit. I wonder if we could maybe, instead of coming to a decision today, I'd love the opportunity to at least inform my caucus that this is where we're at, and maybe even walk them through some of this. In my experience, some members have a more or less interest in this type of thing than others, and we haven't really had an opportunity to update them. So perhaps I would suggest, in a good faith way, to maybe defer a formal decision on these recommendations until just we have the opportunity just to inform our caucuses, solicit any feedback, and maybe take up Mr. D'Entremont on his offer of a tour or some kind of a site visit.
Just give me a second. Madame de Bellefeuille?
Madame de Bellefeuille? Well, I'll answer Mr. Scheer's question. No, it's a different question. Would you like to first finish with his question, because mine is a different question? I'd like to have an opportunity of disposing with his first, of that good suggestion made by Mr. Scheer.
Alors, si je...
So, if we can get consensus around the table based on what Mr. Scheer has said, as well as comments which reflect your interests, perhaps we should defer the decision.
Having a consensus on this until we have until our next meeting, and perhaps we all can engage. And Chris, if your committee could work with the different leaders here, with the purposes of trying to get that done before the next meeting and have those internal discussions, so that we could, hopefully, in the best case scenario, come back for a consensus decision at our next meeting. And that way we can allow the good folks where our decisions will affect construction, the design decisions, we won't allow them to take on too much more water. I'm going to get to you in a second, just after Madame de Bellefeuille, Karina. Madame de Bellefeuille.
Okay. Well, are you asking whether I agree with what you've just proposed? Well, I would like to know whether there's consensus. So you're asking all the members. I'm a little confused.
I'm not opposed to that. I was just thinking that even if the next LVTP meeting is before the next BOI meeting, we could give a mandate to essentially give them the authority to approve it once we've had a chance to look at it, go on the tour, and have feedback, in the interest of not delaying this too far. I don't know what the timing of those two meetings are. If BOI is coming first, then we can come back to BOI. I just, like, as Mr. Scheer was saying, I think we need a bit of time with the map, and I think the idea of doing a tour is a great idea. But I'm comfortable in either of those decisions. I think just in the interest of speed, whichever comes first.
So I'm informed that the next BOI meeting is November 9th, which might be a little tight. The one following that will be November 23rd. So perhaps that's the one that we can shoot for. Seeing any nodding of heads, that would be great. Ms. Finley.
That is in keeping with what I was going to suggest. I think it's important that we do this at this table, and I don't think a few weeks, even if that sounds like 3.5 weeks, is fatal, or it shouldn't be, to design decisions. I just wanted to comment again generally that what I think most of us want to see is a well-functioning workspace, and whoever are the people who will be in administration and leadership in the years to come, they need the space to do their work. I don't necessarily agree with my friend, Mr. McKinnon, that we need to maximize the number of MPs with their offices in Centre Block because you can just walk across the street from a lot of offices. But I do think those who are tasked with leadership in future parliaments need the space to do their work, which includes having more space like meeting rooms and board space and that sort of thing does need to be and I've been over for a tour, but I wasn't given the same access tour as the media apparently was. I was only taken into basically the lobby areas and things like that. So this tour that was given to media in June sounds very extensive. It was all 4 floors, and representations were made about design to the media, which I have some concerns with. I don't want it to appear that somehow promises were made or suggestions made before we've had a chance to discuss it. So I agree with Mr. Scheer, we need time to discuss it, time to go and take a look, ask the questions in the space. I think that's important.
To that point, I've been assured that when we're going to be able to offer the tour for members here, that will be a very fulsome tour that will be able to do that. I have Mr. Scheer. I think I. Excuse me, Madame de Bellefeuille.
I'm sorry, Madame. Ms. de Bellefeuille, I will go to Mr. Scheer after you. Thank you. I think it's better if you forgot me than ignored me. This is the first time that we've had such a long discussion since the beginning of the working group. So as the work goes on, the work will make more sense for parliamentarians. It is good to discuss the things that we have today, and I thank you. But I would like to have some reassurance that before we talk about design and the actual spaces for parliamentarians, I would like to make sure that we provide good accessibility for those that need it at all levels. We have to make sure that we don't omit certain aspects like the height of elevators and so on. So we have to make sure that the spaces are accessible for those with reduced mobility, as well as that the bathrooms are well adapted to the needs of new parents. We need to have change tables and so on. These aspects have to be kept in mind throughout the design decisions. And I think that the team has to have that in mind. I would ask Mr. d'Entremont to answer your question, please. With respect to accessibility, there is a lot of work going into that in this building. We almost have a subcommittee that is dealing with accessibility and also to deal with the needs of families and children, because we have more and more children who are in the building. We want to make very sure that washrooms and other spaces are accessible. Rob could perhaps add something as well on accessibility. Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much for that question. This is certainly an aspect, along with sustainability and other aspects, where we work closely with the House of Commons and the Senate, of course, but also there is a committee an advisory committee on accessibility. We have as well a committee that works on accessibility design and is specialized in that.
An MOU with the new accessibility standards office We've had the Chief Accessibility Officer of Canada in for a site visit and a number of meetings. We are going through a process to achieve the gold standard from the Rick Hansen Association. So we are, I think, taking this quite seriously, both inside the building but out as well. The landscape is totally focused on the experience of an individual within the parliamentary precinct being a universal accessible experience, and this goes to beyond mobility issues to hearing and sight issues and others. We're working with a broad array of stakeholders in the accessibility advisory committee that we have in place. So happy to come and provide more details on this at any time, of course. But I think we're on a good path.
Je vous remercie, Mr. Wright. Puis
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And I want to thank all of you, my colleagues here. There are other people who would like to make comments, but as you know, this is the first time since June that we have really had a chance to look into this issue, and so it's helpful to have these questions. Mr. Scheer, no questions? Very well. Ms. Gould.
To clarify on the consensus point, are we in a position to agree to the first three recommendations by consensus? No, we're not? Okay. All right.
No.
Thank you.
I guess just to clarify what I was proposing was just an opportunity. I know members, yes, there's a couple of intersection points where they may have had opportunities to be aware, to have feedback, but in the reality of this place, I just know that we have a lot of people in our caucus that would be hearing this for the first time, and we try to avoid presenting fait accomplis if there are decision points to be made. So our preference would be that we just hold off on this to give each party a chance to bring members up to speed, and then when we go ahead, you can go ahead knowing that box has been ticked.
Je vais passer
I will call on Mr. Julian for a last comment, but I just want to ensure that there is consensus that by November 23rd, where there are some things that we will try to do. First, organize a thorough visit for members. Perhaps you could ask that question after the question that I have, because what I wanted to ask Mr. D'Entremont, Mr. Wright, and Ms. Kolba is, what are the consequences of deferring this for a month? That is until November 23rd. Are there any consequences if decisions are not made today? If you are comfortable with deferring until the late November, then I have no problem with it. But I would like to have that answer first.
Mr. D'Entremont, who has his hand up, perhaps he might have some comments, and then Mr. Wright, I'll have you finish off.
Well, ultimately, I mean, some of these are left over from the spring. So, we're kind of working as quickly as we possibly can, but knowing that it's hard to get into over the time. So there's maybe some things here that, I mean, we can wait a couple of weeks. In what I understand, we do need to get together with an LTVP meeting to talk to the group. So I'll let Rob maybe take it on. But like I said, some of these things have been left over from the spring. So.
Yeah, and Deputy Speaker's exactly right on this. These are kind of I guess. Things are stacking up a bit, so how to work together to kind of deal through this. So these decisions are certainly one thing, and I think waiting a month on these decisions is not a big challenge for the project. My broader concern would be is that these are a portion of the decisions that really need to be made and have been stacking up by the end of this parliamentary session. So that is more the challenge, I would say, for how to do that effectively and everybody doing it in an informed way. That is critical. So of the 21 decisions that we've envisioned for this parliamentary session, 14 of those concern the centre block. So.
Just a supplementary, Mr. Speaker, if I might, to Mr. Wright. So the 21 decisions you're seeing need to be taken between now and June?
Between now and the end of the parliamentary session in December.
In December. Okay, that's quite a different timeline. So it would seem to me, Mr. Speaker, that we really need to get the information about what those decisions are, particularly the ones that are part of BOY, because if we're meeting on the 23rd of November, that could well be our last meeting before December. So it appears to me that we need to either accelerate the number of meetings that we have, or we need to start making decisions. I would prefer that we accelerate and perhaps insert an extra BOY meeting that allows us to catch up on the decision-making process. And I mean, I completely agree with Ms. Gould and Mr. Scheer. We need to make these decisions from a basis of fact and consultation. But the timelines are, we've only got 6 sitting weeks until we rise in December. And if there's nearly 24 major decisions that need to be made, the BOY needs to be seized with them, and we need to work through them with alacrity.
So I'm going to, before I go back to Mr. D'Entremont, I'd just like to, I would like to pretend that I'm so reactive in this chair that we can make this happen. I just want to let members know that there are 3 meetings of BOY which are scheduled to the end of this session, so November 9th, November 23rd, and December 7th. But the point that I think the fundamental point that you're trying to make, and the essential point that you're trying to make, Mr. Julien, is the right point, is that we need to have a better understanding of the number of decisions that we need to be made so that we could, in this period that we have now, before we go and take a tour and before we consult our caucuses, that we have a fair sense of what we need to do by the end of this parliamentary, before the Christmas break, so that we can make sure that we're not the ones that, make sure that the folks who are doing the construction have the decisions which are made in time so that we can do it efficiently and cost efficiently for the general public. Mr. McKinnon. Sorry, Mr. D'Entremont first, and then Mr. McKinnon.
Okay, and just wanted to say that over the next week and so, if there's something that the caucuses need for presentation, we'd be more than happy to provide them. I know Rob and the gang and myself would be more than happy to come to the caucuses to make quick presentations on it as well, just to sort of help make this go a little bit faster. And then hopefully amongst the offices, we'll be able to set up another meeting offsite so that we can get some of these things talked about so that we're all ready for that meeting in November.
Very helpful. Mr. McKinnon.
Monsieur le Président, s'est installé une belle
Mr. Chairman, we have very good cooperation, and I certainly give all due credit to Mr. D'Entremont for the great working spirit concerning this work. We certainly need that for a successful project. All parliamentarians are invited to participate, and that is key to the progress of the project. We like to comment on the schedules and the budgets, but the first thing to prevent problems in those areas is the decision-making process. This is the biggest project in the history of Canada. It is a heritage project. All of our parties are represented on the working group. So if we need more communication between the party representatives on the working group and the BOY, then maybe that should happen. But these decisions are not partisan in nature. We are working in the best interests of the project and the country and all parliamentarians. We have also established very good cooperation with our colleagues on the other side, in the other house. We have invited their comments on the project, and all parliamentarians on the working group have established good working relationships with their Senate colleagues. So I just want to say that, as we say in English, time is money.
Ceci, ce sont des décisions que le groupe
And time is money. These are decisions that were made by the working group in May, and Mr. D'Entremont put it very politely, but we can't create delays for the workers with the working group. If we wait until late November, there are going to be increased costs and more time involved. So I would invite my colleagues to make sure that the work can continue on schedule, that we have good communication so that we can talk to everyone and get this done. Thank you, Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you for this reminder. I think that with what has been said here today and our public undertaking to ensure that we can be in a position to be able to respect the timeline so as to be able to make decisions so that we can respect the budgets that have been allocated for this monumental project. Very well. If there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Mr. D'Entremont and your team, Mr. Wright, Ms. Kulba, and your team, and we can move on to the next item on the agenda. And this
Parliamentary Council report. Et puis, Monsieur D'Entremont, you're back on the hot seat. Votre microphone est...
You're on mute.
There we go, making sure we have it. Like I haven't done that before. We start talking about a $3 billion project or a $5 billion or $6 billion project to just a few hundred thousand here. En tant que coprésident du Conseil interparlementaire mixte.
As the co-chair of the Joint Interparliamentary Council, it is my pleasure to present the annual report on our spending in 2022-2023. With me is Jeremy Leblanc, and the clerk of the council, and his team is responsible for producing this report. I hope to give you an overview of the work of the associations during this period, as described in this report, after which I would be pleased to answer your questions. In March of 2022, the Joint Interparliamentary Council lifted the moratorium on hosting foreign delegations and traveling abroad. This allowed parliamentarians to attend in-person events for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. In 2021 and 2021-22, associations' activities were virtual, and therefore there was very little spending on activities. The 2019-2020 fiscal year was an election year, so it may be more appropriate to make comparisons between last year and the 2018-2019 fiscal year, the most recent year without a pandemic or election.
2023, parliamentary associations undertook 61 travel activities in 31 different countries, and the Canadian Parliament welcomed 26 delegations from abroad. Compared to the 2018-2019 fiscal year, we see a reduction of about 25% in the number of travel activities. In addition, the number of participants in these activities is approximately 15% lower compared to 18-19, although the level of spending is about equal. We can thus see the impact of inflation in the travel sector's association and level of activity. The total budget for parliamentary associations for 22-23 was just over $4.3 million, the same amount as the previous 5 fiscal years. Over $1.5 million was spent on membership fees for multilateral associations last year. Indeed, we can see an upward trend in contribution expenditures, since those of the last year represent an increase of almost $100,000 compared to the previous fiscal year, and an increase of approximately $150,000 compared to 18-19. This variation can be explained by a slight increase in membership fee allocations to Canada, and since invoices are received in foreign countries, these expenses may vary based on exchange rate fluctuations. Les dépenses totales liées aux activités des associations parlementaires en 22-23 représentent un taux d'utilisation du budget de 88%, laissant un solde budgétaire de...
This leaves $502,000 at the year end. $502,000, and this is at year end. However, it's important to point out that a part of this envelope, roughly $178,000, had been set aside for the planning of international conferences that Canada is hosting. This was explained largely that because some delegates cancel their participation in activities at the last minute or do not obtain permission to travel. This year, our parliamentary associations did not hold annual general meetings, as decided by the JIC, due to difficulties in accessing the resources needed for meetings.
Significant reduction in the number of virtual and hybrid meetings last year due to the end of the moratorium. However, virtual activities have continued to be an important part of the work of associations in addition to travel and hosting delegations in Canada, despite current resource constraints that limit virtual or hybrid meetings that can be held simultaneously in the parliamentary precinct, often to the detriment of the associations. And I think translation is an issue that we'll continue to look at. This is a very brief summary of the activities of the associations, but there's much more detail in the report. And I remind you that following the presentation, where I'm just going to move right into it because I know we're starting to get pressed for time. I'll take questions after this. I'm also here to seek your approval for a temporary increase to the Council's budgetary envelope for the fiscal years 2023-2024 and 2024-25. Associations play an important role in international relations and help to advance Canadian views and interests. Parliamentarians can exert a degree of influence over decisions taken in other countries and in multilateral bodies. However, in order to do so effectively, Canada requires adequate representation in activities. Associations have had to reduce the size of the delegation in addition to reducing the number of activities they can undertake within the confines of the existing budget. This directly impacts the number of votes Canada may be allocated at international annual meetings and limit the number of contacts Canadian parliamentarians may have. It also can prevent Canadian delegates from participating in certain committees and therefore fully carrying out their mandates. As mentioned a few minutes ago during my presentation of the annual report, the total budgetary envelope for parliamentary associations was just over $4.3 million in 22-23, an amount that has not increased since 17-18. À l'hiver 2022, un sous-comité du Conseil a recommandé que...
In winter 2022, a council subcommittee recommended that analysis be conducted to assess whether current budgetary envelope was adequate to sustain an appropriate level of activity. The details of this analysis are before you in this submission. The analysis shows that with the same level of funding as the 2018-19 fiscal year, associations participated in 25% fewer travel activities, and the number of participants in these activities was approximately 15% lower compared to 2018-2019. Additionally, since 18-19, we have noted a total increase of 12.4% for annual contributions paid by multilateral associations, and we expect these fees to continue to rise. As the contributions are paid by the Council's budgetary envelope, this leaves less funding available to distribute for association activities. While we all may wish for these contributions to be lower, it is essential that Canadian delegates be present and active at international meetings in order to influence budgetary decisions and in order to encourage fiscal restraint.
Also been steadily increasing, with the average cost for activity having increased 18% since 18-19. This is consistent with the impact of inflation, specifically on the cost of travel. The majority of association activity expenses are transportation costs, and we have seen an even higher rate of inflation for air travel at about 27.7%. While we continue to maximize opportunities for virtual presentations when feasible, there has been a return to the in-person activities worldwide, and Canada must play an active role in these activities. The Council is seeking a temporary increase to the Parliamentary Association's budgetary envelope in the amount of $430,550 for both the 2023-2024 and 2024-2025 fiscal years. This would be shared according to the usual 30-70 split from the Senate and the House. This is not new funding being sought, but rather from within existing budgets in the Senate and the House of Commons. I thank you, and I'm now happy, or Jeremy and I are happy, to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. D'Entremont. I have, opening it up for questions, I already have Ms. Finley on the speaking list. Just signal to me if you'd like to speak as well, and Mr. Scheer. Ms. Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I note that although we're talking about access and that there has been a cutback on the numbers and delegation, etc. In the last fiscal year, April 2022 through to March 2023, Parliamentary Association members traveled abroad for events 16 times in the U.S., 5 in France, 4 in the United Kingdom, 3 in Egypt, 2 in Belgium, 2 times to Cambodia, 2 to Greenland, 2 to Poland, 2 to Rwanda, 2 to Tahiti, 2 to Thailand, Albania, Austria, Bahrain, Colombia, Denmark, Ghana, Greece, Japan, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Morocco, Norway, Senegal, Spain, and Tunisia. In a world where we here as parliamentarians have moved to hybrid parliaments, we're saying that all this travel is necessary worldwide for parliamentary associations. And I personally am not inclined to increase the budget for this. Like any times of constraint, which we are in, I understand there's increased costs, but perhaps the way to deal with it is to not be traveling quite as much or with quite as many. Those are a lot of trips. And when the comment is made that we influence what's happening in these countries and their decisions, I'm not sure that is completely accurate, or to what extent that an increase of the kind that is being sought is justified. So I don't really think travel has been very constrained through parliamentary associations, and do we really need to have our delegations in particularly smaller locations like Tahiti twice in the same fiscal year? I'm not convinced of that. I understand better things like leading the way on expenditures, as I understand it, is the Canada-NATO Parliamentary Association. Well, we've had a lot of activity with respect to NATO. We are an important member of NATO. We have a ground war in Europe. Some of those make more sense to me than some of this other travel. So I am not inclined to agree with an increase. Thanks.
If I may answer just a little bit on the virtual side of things. Time zone challenges when you're dealing with other countries is difficult. When I did get to participate in APF issues, sometimes we were meeting with people from Vietnam all the way to here, and it was always difficult to find a spot that actually we could participate. So sometimes it meant early mornings and late nights for many of the delegations that are participating in it. When it comes to where these groups are actually going, we don't make that decision on their behalf. And we don't necessarily approve or disapprove it. We give them a budget envelope to deal with. So we're just trying to echo back the challenges that we're hearing from those associations as they travel. That, of course, is many members from our different caucuses as well. Jeremy, I don't know if you had another comment on that when it comes to the added cost is just when you have a 27% more, cost in air travel. We are already cutting the number of members that are actually able to participate in some of these things. So, there has been a fair cut. Yeah, they seem to be traveling, but not everybody's getting to participate like we have in the past.
So I know you have a supplementary, Ms. Finley. Perhaps that would be helpful then if Mr. LeBlanc would like to respond. That would be great.
Oh, well, if I can just respond to that, and then maybe
Please.
You could respond. You're speaking to a member of Parliament from British Columbia. I understand about time zones. I deal with them every week. And sometimes I have meetings at 3 and 4 in the morning from BC just to be dealing with an Ottawa matter. So I get that, but that to me is not persuasive. Also, it may be that not as many people are traveling as before, but then maybe that needs to be cut back even more, given realities of our economy.
Sure. I don't know, Mr. D'Entremont, you want to go, or do you, Mr. LeBlanc? Is there
No, I think
anything-
I'll let Jeremy. He is the I would call the guru when it comes to putting the budgets together. So I trust him immensely on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it is true that there have been a fair number of association activities that have taken place since the pandemic ended. It is substantially lower than the number of activities that most associations would have undertaken in the period before the pandemic, a cut of about 25%. And what that's meant for many of the associations is not being able to fully participate in the activities, especially of multilateral bodies. So you mentioned the example of the Canada-NATO Parliamentary Assembly. For that association, the reduced budget has meant they're not able to participate in meetings of certain committees that Canada is a member of. They've had to reduce the size of the delegations that they send to those meetings, which means Canada doesn't have as many votes at the Assembly as it might otherwise. And that's true of the IPU or CPA or IPF or a number of those other associations. You also mentioned the number of countries, some of the places that have been visited. In many cases, those are the spots that are hosting multilateral conferences as opposed to areas where we're going to have a bilateral visit in that country. There's a number that are bilateral visits. In some cases, though, the site of the meeting is in Rwanda. It's not necessarily a Canada-Rwanda activity, but it's a meeting of the IPU with hundreds of countries that happens to be taking place in Rwanda this year and may take place somewhere else in the following year.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. I have 3 other people on the list so far. I have Mr. Scheer, Mr. Julien, and Mr. McKinnon.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, then make a comment. You said that this requested increase could be funded out of existing House of Commons and I presume Senate administration budgets. So have you already identified where those savings could be made?
Let Jeremy have that one as well.
Yeah, I think I'm probably best placed to stand. So there are funds that are lapsed by both the Senate and House administration each year. There's a portion that's lapsed in the funding for members' office budgets, which are not fully utilized, for example. There's also often funding that could be lapsed in the committee's envelope, for example, or other envelopes that are available for the administration. And our finance friends could give a more precise example of the amount that's funded each year, but certainly we're comfortable that the $400,000 that's being sought here could be found within those existing budgets that would otherwise lapse, rather than requesting supplementary funding in order to provide that.
And when those budgets or those envelopes lapse, that money is essentially returned back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund?
That's right.
So it goes back to taxpayers. Well, for the reasons that my colleague mentioned, I can't support this increase either. I understand the important work that these associations do. I believer in parliamentary democracy. It gives wide perspective from all political parties when these conferences and bilateral visits occur. But I think in the current climate, I just don't believe that. I just don't believe that we can support this type of increase. I think there are a lot more priorities that the Government of Canada collectively and Parliament collectively have to focus on in terms of finding savings and efficiencies for taxpayers to bring down inflation. We got confirmation from the Governor of the Bank of Canada just yesterday that government spending has an impact on inflation, helps drive it up. So any little thing we can do, any big thing we can do, anything of any shape or size and whatever scope that we can do to help ease that pressure, I think that should be our focus. So I can't support the recommendation.
Get that inflation.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Scheer. Mr. Julien.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have some difficulty with the recommendation to increase the budget. I note that we saw with the JIC over the last 4 years, 74% usage rate of the budget, 35%, 34%, and 88%. And it seems to me that essentially we're not getting a full use of the existing budget. I think it's fair to say that Canadians are really struggling to make ends meet. They're being gouged when they go to grocery stores. They're being gouged when they get a fill up. They're being gouged by the financialization of housing. So they're really struggling, and I can't see a justification to increase the JIC budget, particularly when the budget over the last 4 years has not been fully used. So it doesn't seem to make sense to increase the budget when the existing usage rate has been so low. And I understand we're coming out of the pandemic, but we hopefully as well have had other ways of getting things done. And I certainly agree that international meetings can be often very important. I think we need to ensure that we are fully using the existing budget, but I can't support increasing that. And I note the proposal talks about a 30%, I believe, increase from the Senate side. I note that the Senate pickup on international travel seems to be often higher, 40 to 50%. So I note that with some concern about the existing evaluation between the House of Commons spending and the Senate spending on this. I'm not sure that the Senate is spending proportionally to the uptake that senators who aren't elected, they're appointed, the amount of travel that senators actually do. So I can't approve or support this initiative, and I hope that the JIC can look at other ways of ensuring that we are represented, but also fully using the existing budget that is allocated and that has not been fully used at any point in the last 5 years. So thank you.
If I may just make a quick little comments there. When it comes to utilization rate, has always been difficult. The way we try to budget for the associations is to give them a sort of a premier versement in the beginning, and then see who's got trips planned or challenges in their budgets for the final part of the year. And what's happening really is at the end of the year, since they don't know what their budgets are, they can't book in time, and they really can't spend the money, some of the monies that they actually have sitting in the association. So it's been a bit of a challenge. It's kind of the way we do budget. Maybe we could allow them to budget full amounts and hope that they don't go over them. But that's been part of our challenge with JIC to hold them to the budget that actually is available to them. And then senators get to travel a little more than MPs because of pairing and other issues. If an MP can't go, it opens up a slot for the Senate. So that's kind of a longstanding practice within those associations as well. And I don't know if Jeremy has a little more to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. d'Entremont. On the utilization rate, I would point out 2 of those years were pandemic years when there was no travel at all. So, of course, the utilization rate would have been much lower in those years. It is true that there are challenges in getting that utilization rate up to 100. And in many cases, it has to do with trips that are either canceled because, or delegates' participation that's canceled at the last minute of whips. So if each association has two members on a particular delegation whose participation is cancelled at the last minute, and that happens from time to time. That's the reality of minority government. Then they're not spending their full budget, but there's perhaps not enough funding left over for them to undertake a new activity with the $10,000 or $15,000 that may be saved by cancellation that comes in those sorts of activities. One of the solutions that's been discussed at the JIC in the past is the idea of potentially over-allocating the envelope. And so taking the $2.7 million that's available for activities and rather than just apportioning that 2.7 between the 13 associations, perhaps allocating $3 million amongst the 13 associations with the idea that their utilization rate will make it such that the spending in the end might be 2.7. It allows associations with perhaps a bit more flexibility to be able to fully spend their budgets by taking that approach. It's an approach that has been suggested in the past, one that the Senate, if I'm honest, has not been terribly comfortable with, but that is an avenue that could be explored potentially. It means having some degree of comfort that if the risk that's taken in that over-allocation proves to be riskier, and associations go past that allocation. So if we allocate $3 million and they do spend $3 million, then we're over the size of the total envelope. But if we allocate $3 million and it means they end up spending 2.65 of the 2.7, then that could be an idea. So that's something that JIC can explore.
Thank you very much. Final comment, Mr. McKinnon.
Donc, il est clair, Monsieur le Président, qu'il n'y a...
Clearly, Chair, we will not have consensus on this item. I would simply wish to remind our colleagues of the budgetary constraints here. This reduces Canada's place in the world. So, yes, there's the African Union, there's Interparliamentary Union, where currently there's a Liberal member, a Conservative member, an NPD member, unfortunately not a Bloc member. But these trips are always undertaken across party lines. These people always have a philosophy and perspective that when you leave the continent, there is no more partisanship. Canada has to be represented in a nonpartisan way. And I regret that the vision here is such that we would have to sacrifice Canada's representation in these matters, because this necessarily leaves room for others, and leaving room for others leaves room for others in international fora. And I very much regret this state of affairs, but very clearly there will not be consensus. And manifestly, who is this going to harm? The smallest party in the House. But of course, we will yield to the views here on the Boy. Thank you.
Egg,
Colleagues, there is no consensus clearly in terms of the increase in the budget as proposed under tab 4. Did I hear that there is consensus about reusing budgets on a temporary level as proposed under tab 5? There's the overall budget, and no consensus for an increase in that. But what about the second portion for reusing or reallocating funds? Do we have consensus there, or is there no consensus?
Do you mind if I just ask for clarification? I was under the impression that the entire 10% increase was to be funded through reallocations from existing budgets. Is that?
sorry, yes, you are right.
Okay.
So no.
So no. Yeah.
I hear a no.
So I think
hear no.
where there may be consensus, I don't know, is that the JIC ensure that they use the budget that's already allocated. At 88% usage rate last year. If the JIC wants to look at that, that's certainly within their purview.
Madame de Bellefeuille?
Good. Thank you, Chair. If you're referring to the recommendation in the document, which is on page 3 of the presentation, there's a recommendation. I do not see in that recommendation anything about reallocation. When you read it, you're telling us what's recommended, and that is to accept the temporary increase in the budget. It's not a permanent increase, it's a temporary increase for the year ending March 31st and the next year. And then 70% for House Administration and 70% for the Senate. And that the temporary funding be subject to a further discussion for the other fiscal year. But I don't understand the other part of your question, because what I understood from the conversation is that the recommendation here, if there's no consensus, there's no consensus. So what are you proposing now? No, I made a mistake, Ms. de Bellefeuille, because I was wondering whether I was not following. So, Chair, I'm somewhat sensitive to the conversation that I have heard when I hear my colleague from the Conservative Party, who I greatly respect, ask about reducing delegations abroad to reduce costs. Well, very clearly that for Bloc or NDP representatives, this implies that we could be excluded from missions. I would like to say that currently missions respect the House proportions of people who are democratically elected, and it's true that delegations are already reduced in size. So by allowing members of the parties to be represented. So if you note that there is no consensus, perhaps we could continue our discussion on the other items, which I think are urgent, and perhaps come back to this if JIC has any other counter-proposal to make, so as to obtain consensus as a team here around the table. Excellent suggestion, Ms. de Bellefeuille. I will certainly take this as a good way to proceed. Colleagues, let's thank you, Mr. Leblanc. Thank you, Mr. d'Entremont, for your presentation. We have a 6th item on the public portion of our agenda. I'd like to call upon Mr. St. George and his team to make their presentation to us regarding British Columbia's Legislative Assembly's constitutional office leasing model.
This item, I am conscious of the time. I wanted to ask you if there are any decisions in the in-camera session that need to be taken today.
Thank you for that. Indeed, there are decisions which do need to be taken today.
May I suggest then, since I was the one who originated the matter, the work is excellent. I wanted to compliment Mr. St. George and his team, and that we simply receive the document at this point and then potentially come back to it at a future meeting.
Thank you for that suggestion. I see a consensus around the table for that. So, Mr. St. George and équipe, merci beaucoup de votre travail. On va
Thank you very much for your work, Mr. St. George and your team. You have achieved rare consensus. Colleagues, let's take a break for a few moments so that we can move into the in-camera session. Thank you again for your participation, and thanks to the Canadian public for attending our Board of Internal Economy meeting.